You're watching The John Wood Jr. Show. I'm your host, John Wood Jr. Hey folks, you are about to hear my conversation with Karen Hunter of The Karen Hunter Show, Sirius XM. I actually just got finished listening back to it myself, and I very much enjoyed it. Karen is somebody who I know to have a heart for bridging the divide. At the same time, some of the things she says in this conversation, for some of you at least, are going to be inflammatory. I mean, Karen is a person who believes that American society historically and in the present moment is defined in so many vital ways by history, by a reality as she sees it of white supremacy, of white nationalism. At the same time, she and I had deep exchanges on the significance of racial identity, the need or perhaps the danger of us leaning in too much to racial identity. Some of you may be surprised on some of the things she has to say with regards to that particular subject. She's pessimistic about the future of American society. I make the case for optimism as best I can, but I don't want to give away too much. Ladies and gentlemen, I bring you Karen Hunter.
And I'm joined today by a fascinating and charismatic and compelling guest. She is the winner she's a multiple award-winning journalist. She's a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist. Let me get that right. Co-author of multiple New York Times best-selling books, the president and CEO of Karen Hunter Publishing, and the host of the Karen Hunter Show on Sirius XM Radio. You may have guessed it, but my guest today is Karen Hunter. Karen, how are you doing today?
I'm awesome. I am awesome. Thank you for joining me on your show. Thanks for inviting me, John Wood Jr. I appreciate appreciate you, and I'm very happy to be here today.
Of course. Well, I'm happy to join you joining me, Karen. I guess that's one way we can put it. And really grateful to have this conversation. You and I met not too long ago with a group of folks who are working on an enterprising project to sort of bring together the American people. And, I have seen you sort of like here and there over the years, seen you on MSNBC and various other networks. And just more recently have started to get into the Karen Hunter Show more directly. A good friend of mine and a friend of Braver Angels is a Los Angeles-based radio show host named Dominique Prima. And I don't know if you know Dominique or have ever interacted with her directly, but she said a flattering thing about you. She said, Karen Hunter is one of the most popular radio show hosts with my own listeners. So I get a little jealous of her sometimes. But you'll have a good time talking to her. And then when you and I did do your show, it was absolutely a correct prediction. So beautiful to be on the mic with you. I wanted to hit sort of a spate of topics. Before we got started, I said to you, Karen, I said, well, one thing I want to do is get the Karen Hunter story out a little bit, ask you a little bit about yourself for the edification of folks listening. And you told me, you said, well, I'll answer your questions, but I really don't think that that's something that is going to edify the conversation too much, because we've got such a superficial view into who people are. We think we know about folks, and it doesn't do anything to, well, let me not characterize your answer here. I want to ask you about your story, where you came from, but let me just ask you this question. Why do you think that does not matter? And feel free to say whatever else you might want to say about it.
We're so much more than, I was born in Orange, New Jersey. I was raised in East Orange in this neighborhood. I went to Catholic school up until high school. I went to Drew University, and, those are bio data points. Mm-hmm. But who I am, like right now in this moment, is someone who has been dramatically impacted by a social political system that I'm not sure needs to live. Mm-hmm. And I'm feeling very strongly about this experiment called America, which is supposed to be one of the greatest democracies of all time, is at an inflection point. It's fractured. And I don't know if Humpty Dumpty can get back on that wall in one piece. And I don't know if Humpty Dumpty should. So my bio, I don't know how that impacts that, because I'm not that person that was born in born in Orange, raised in East Orange, went to this school, have even these awards and these New York Times bestsellers and all of these businesses and $1 million from Bear Stearns and all. That has nothing to do, or I'm not saying it doesn't inform, because all of those experiences shaped me. But who I am right now and what I'm doing right now, yeah, I don't know how much that actually, matters.
Well, you did identify yourself as being somebody who has been in this moment in time affected by this socio-political experiment that we can refer to as American democracy, American politics, what have you. I want to get into that and your perspective on it, but let me just say something really quick about the bio question. So I talk a lot about myself, right? And I frequently talk about myself in the context of, having sort of come from you could say a biracial, bipartisan kind of family background. I grew up sort of in multicultural suburbs. I had, family that came from the inner city on my mom's side, folks from more affluent part of the world on my grandfather's side. I'm really sensitive to the fact that, we circulate labels, and labels can do a disservice because they can reduce us to less than what we really are. On the other hand, a lot of folks, and I think primarily on the left, but a lot of folks will talk about, sort of like the importance of identity in the conversation. And I kind of got a lot of sympathy for that because, people will sometimes say, talk about the Black experience, right? And I think that there's something that you can identify as sort of like, sort of a general thrust of Black history that touches you, touches me. But I'm very quick to say that, like, I am Black. I identify, with, sort of the Black experiences. I, in my subjective kind of position in the world, have received it, and how, I have sort of my own little piece in it. But I'm very quick to not want my experience to be necessarily be taken as representative of, all folks just because they share that one label with me, right? And so I try to get into the particularities of sort of where I come from, because I know about myself that in a lot of ways I am more moderate, I am more centrist, I am more, sort of idealistic than some folks are about kind of, the idealism of American democracy. And I think for myself, but I also recognize the fact that, hey, I've got a certain point of view that comes with the circumstances of my upbringing. And so in that sense, I feel like the bio is relevant for contextualizing a little bit of how I think and how I move in the world and so forth. So I'm just wondering, like, on the significance of identity, like putting it that way, you did start to say it a little bit. I think that, certain circumstances have an impact on kind of how you look at things, but is identity not kind of an important part of what we should be talking about?
The only identity that should matter is human, right? And I'm not even saying that like to be flippant, but if I can't look at you and see the humanity in you and see myself in you without your bio, if I can't see that John Wood is worthy of my time, my energy, he's worthy of respect, he's worthy of life, he deserves to live, because, not just because he's handsome, he's got a wonderful smile and, whatever. But, that is where, to me, I think we need to start. Like, if there's something in your bio that I can relate to, that's great, but I shouldn't need that to see you as a human being. And I feel like so many people right now can't even see the humanity in one another. So does it matter if we went to the same school? If we, have the same degree, that we, maybe go to the same country club, drive the same car, come from similar, back. I've never been poor a day in my life. I don't know what inner city poverty looks like. My daddy was in my house, and everybody in my street, in my neighborhood, in my community had a daddy. Everybody was expected to go to college. We were all Black. What does that mean? So when people start throwing out statistics and 70%, blah, 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 I don't relate to that. No one on my street was a crackhead. I don't relate to that. I didn't grow up in that. I grew up in affluence. My father paid for, I didn't have student loans. I don't relate to student loan debt, but does that mean I don't have enough humanity to be able to say, we should probably forgive student loan debt because I didn't have it? So y'all got to figure it out. No, people should eat. I've never been poor, but I believe poor people should not exist in a country that's the richest in the world. Children should not go to bed hungry. I never went to bed hungry, obviously. Never been hungry a day in my life. But it doesn't mean I don't have enough compassion because I'm a human being to be able to understand the biography of people that I don't share things with.
Right. Yeah. Well, so first of all, we're already busting stereotypes a bit because, I'm the registered Republican talking about identity and so forth. And I think you're looked at as coming from the left, but you're hitting
No,
these
the internet.
transcendent notes and whatnot, shared humanity, de-emphasizing the its significance of like particular racial labels and so forth. I'm not criticizing. I'm just saying that it's great for me, for people to be able to hear folks kind of speak beyond what they might assume the assumptions are and so forth. But I feel like you want to jump in.
No, I hate labels. That left thing, I don't know what that is. I don't know what the right is. I don't know. I mean, I said, somebody said today, oh, Joe Manchin is showing himself to be a Republican. I said, no, he's showing himself to be a white nationalist.
That's a label, though.
No,
yeah, that's a hell of a label.
White nationalism is a thing that actually drives everything in this country. And that's if we can't agree on that, right? Then I don't know how much more we can agree on, because there is a system involved. He is not voting a party. He's voting power and protection of that power. You call it whatever you want. So I'll leave the white label out. White label out.
I'm not telling you to edit yourself. I'm just pointing out that it's a label. But if you're saying that it's the appropriate label, then let's go ahead and talk about that. But before we jump,
you're right. Let me remove that, because I've been, and it's tough, right? And this is how wedded we are to labels.
Yeah.
That even like I'm like toying with this idea, like what would happen if we no longer identify people as white and black?
Mm-hmm.
What would happen? Yeah. Toni Morrison says, what do I do if I take away your race? Wait, how good, are you any good? If I take away, are you special? Toni Morrison, I wish I could say it verbatim because it's so brilliant. When I take away your race, are you any good? It's like, there's so many people who are so wedded to these labels that they are willing to go into the streets, to storm the Capitol, around the notion of the possibility of losing them. So
Yeah. Okay. Well, so let's jump into a certain point in history here, because everything you said beautifully, I think, sets up something that's really deep, really core, and at the center of a lot of conversations that I'd love for us to be able to unpack together. And the beautiful thing about talking to you is that I'm not entirely sure which way I expect you to go on one question or another, which is a compliment. Let me just say, but tribute to your independence of thought. But so in the spaces that I talk in, oftentimes there is a sort of focus on the history of the civil rights movement, and some people will say, oh, the civil rights movement has changed and so forth, particularly if you're drawing sort of this bit of a simplistic narrative, but particularly if you're sort of going from Dr. King and the nonviolent movement, and then you sort of observe a transition into the Black Power movement and so forth. And now you've got a point in time where many folks will say, many folks in the heterodox kind of community, folks like my pal Thomas Chatterton Williams, my friend Glenn Lowry, and John McWhorter, and folks who are more conservative than them will make the point that modern social justice is so obsessed with race, so obsessed with identity politics and so forth. But Martin Luther King Jr., of course, said things like he looks forward to the day when no one will shout white power, no one will shout black power, but we'll talk about God's power, right? That obviously we will come to a place where we're judged not by the content, not by the color of our skin, but by the content of our character. And so many folks will say that we're so obsessed with the racial analysis and so forth that we can't treat each other as human beings like we ought to in the conversation. At the same time, folks will make the argument. Ibram X. Kendi will make the argument. Ta-Nehisi Coates will make the argument. I might even make the argument in a certain way, probably different than they would, that race is important for sort of understanding how we show up in the world and how it is that policies and systems have impacted us, over the course of time related to race. And of course, Ibram X. Kendi would argue exactly, I think, what you said, that he would say white supremacy, but that white supremacy is an animating thing driving the whole evolution of the United States, its institutions, its politics. Didn't just stop with the passing of the Voting Rights Act in 1965. That this is a thing that goes through mass incarceration all the way right down to today, and efforts to suppress the vote in the state of Georgia, et cetera, et cetera. And so, how do you look at given the fact that you, on the one hand, are saying that we should get away from these racial labels, and I think would get applause from my listeners who are coming from that side saying, yeah, we obsess too much about race. Karen is right. But on the other hand, you're saying that white nationalism is an ever-present kind of force in our society. And now, you can get another group of my listeners clapping their hands and saying Karen's right about that. How do you, why is it that you can hold these two positions together, but these positions seem to divide everybody else? For other folks, these two things seem to be a contradiction, but not for you.
I have a high IQ. So
I believe it. I know it.
I'm just, and that doesn't matter either, because that's also a made up construct. So let me ask you this. First of all, we all love to cherry pick Martin Luther King. That speech was delivered in 1963. He died in 1968, one of the most unpopular people at the time of his death. He was widely unpopular. He had a 68% disapproval rating at the time of his death. Whites and blacks did not like Martin Luther King when he died, but we love to immortalize him with those, that little black girls and little black boys can hold hands, the little white boys and black girls, whatever was the part, because I haven't memorized the speech. But that said, as he was evolving, and this is the point that I'm making, whether it's Howard Thurman's influence or, what was actually happening in the world, where you start to see, poor white folk and poor black folk having the same experience. And then there's a war and you're like, we're going to fight what now? What, we're going to kill people in Vietnam for what reason? And we're sending people over to do what now? Makes no sense to me. Something's going on here, and I see things differently. Same as Malcolm going to Mecca, seeing all different shades of folk and realizing this is not about race. Smart people get there really easily when directed. Because I will ask this question of everyone listening. Please define, and John, I would love for you to do this. Define what it means to be white. What is white?
Yeah. Well, if you're throwing that question to me, what does it mean to be white? I mean, from my vantage point, white is sort of an amalgamation kind of term. It's a broad-based label for a wide spectrum of folks who actually come from all over the place, who have different experiences.
What is it? What is it?
Different cultures and so forth.
What's white music? What's white culture? Like,
right, exactly.
What is white?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, I think.
No, seriously, can you?
The best you can say is that it's a spectrum of things, I guess. A spectrum of things that we say that, like, on the basis of the fact that you got like a majority of people in this country who technically are classified as white, but they could be Anglo, they could be Latin, some of them eat Southern foods.
Hold on. Was there a time when Italians were not white?
There was. Absolutely. They became white later.
Hold on. Was there a time when Irish were not white?
And that is my understanding. Absolutely.
Was there a time when Jewish people were not white?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
So if we can, bring people in and take them out, what is it? Like, is it a race?
It's a fluid construct, right?
It's a construct. It's not only is it fluid, it's a power construct. It's a made up construct. Or the Romans did not identify. I just saw this brilliant piece on, I want to say it was, CBS Sunday Morning, one of my favorite shows to watch. So that's one of you put that in my bio. I watch CBS Sunday Morning every Sunday.
There you go.
My routines, I eat breakfast and I watch that. Shout out to Jane Pauley. Love her. Those wonderful Roman sculptures that are alabaster, brilliant, clean, pristine white. They were not white. Not only were they not white, there were pigments on a lot of them that were my complexion and your complexion, because in the Roman Empire, they didn't divide people based on white and black. It didn't exist. It's a made up construct to justify a system. And this is, again, all of this talk about history and what should be in history and what should not. There has to be a reckoning, because if we cannot agree on facts, in terms of the founding of this country, the founding of this culture, the founding of the not just the political system, but the financial system that gave birth to this great country, America, which is that you had to devise something that justified the immoral bondage that you put people in and the heinous things that you did to them, right? So you have to erase the fact that these same people that you brought here to build a country also gave you math and science, also came here with the skills to be able to plant rice. Rice came from there, and yams and all of the agriculture, that cotton you needed. We have to get these special artisans, the blacksmiths, and all of the folk that came with skills, right? But we have to erase that and say they're not human. And here's why: we got these We do checking the brain. We're going to put them in human zoos. We're going to watch, and they're Black, we're white, and never shall the two meet. So that's really, from the founding. Thomas Jefferson knew the truth. He traveled the world. He was a brilliant man. He had a Quran, for crying out loud. Keith Ellison swore in on it, first Muslim in Congress. He knew the truth, but he also knew that the narrative and the propaganda that had to support this immense, massive undertaking needed that story to uphold this, and there we have whiteness.
Well,
Now,
and Thomas Jefferson, from what I understand, tried to sort of leave that out tried to deliberately sort of write that out in the Declaration of Independence. I mean, you can say in contradiction of the fact that he nevertheless held on to his slaves afterwards, but that there was so much pushback.
I'm sorry, this is like nails on a chalkboard, because when you know better, you do better. There were no slaves. There were people, human beings in bondage. They were enslaved. They were people. They had lives. They were living. They were doing happy, nice things, or maybe not. But they got snatched up and kidnapped and brought here. They were human beings. When they humanize them into being slaves. And again, this is part of the work that we have to do to kind of reframe and remind people that they were human beings. We're human beings. You're a human being. I'm a human being, worthy of respect, worthy of acknowledgement, and just worthy of life.
Yeah. Well, I understand where you're coming from. We are more than our condition, right? So you can be a human being in the condition of enslavement, but you are not a slave, right? That is not definitive of, who you are internally and substantively. But, a lot of this is just difficulty with language, to be honest. I mean, we use shorthands. This kind of gets back to your issue with labels to begin with. So I applaud you for being consistent, Karen, because you are consistent.
Yes. I know so many people that could say Giannis Antetokounmpo. They mastered that. NBA champion, Giannis Antetokounmpo.
Right.
People can say all of those letters, consonants, and vowels. That they figured that out. Laziness. It's just laziness.
Okay. Point taken. All right. So let us be rhetorically disciplined. I appreciate the point. But spell out for us then, because you've given us, I think, the beginnings of this argument, but you sort of started off our conversation by saying that you are greatly, just sort of paraphrase you or summarize you are incredibly, it sounds like, or at least fairly pessimistic about the prospects of the American project, so to speak. It sounds like both historically and contemporaneously, or rather that you think it was founded perhaps on an ill foundation and maybe shouldn't even continue in some form or fashion. Now, that sounds like a striking statement to me, but I'd like to know just sort of what just what you mean by that.
So I was sitting in my house two periods in the last 7 years since I've been on the radio, and I'm generally most of my life very optimistic, glass half full type of chick. It was a Wednesday night going into a Thursday morning. I remember it like it was yesterday. I was watching Rachel Maddow. Actually, I was watching CNN, I think, and I was up late writing, and something flashed across across breaking news. People were shot in a church. So we've had a lot of mass shootings in this country. I leaned in. Actually, I turned to Rachel Maddow, and she didn't have it, so I turned back to CNN. And as the story starts to unfold, somebody went into a church on a Wednesday night Bible study, something I've done. Mm-hmm. I used to be a part of the church. We had Wednesday night Bible study. We even had tests. I know what that is, and it's, and sat in that Bible study, sat in that church service for a couple of hours, and then opened fire, left one person alive to go run back and tell, had a manifesto.
Yeah.
And I was stunned that somebody could have that little of humanity that could go into a church, people praying to God, and then welcoming you in and take that life. And then May of 2020, I'm sitting home during a pandemic, and this viral video comes out, and I'm watching not just Chauvin with his knee grinding into George Floyd's neck, but other officers who were sworn to serve and protect. I've done police training at Robin's Neck on following the shooting of Amadou Diallo. That also was baffling, how you could fire 19 shots into a human body, 30 of them in a, so that means half of them didn't hit, 10, at least 11 of them didn't hit. So you're in a community and you're firing off. Bullets don't have a name. You could have shot a kid or anything, but there's this lack of humanity that makes it hard for me to be optimistic that even a year after George Floyd was murdered, even after 6 years after those beautiful people in Charleston, South Carolina were killed in a church, we still are, discounting that there's a race problem. Those are isolated incidents. So I'm just not too optimistic because, if you can't first tell me what it means to be white, if you can't define it, yet you will fight for it with every fiber of your being, fight to preserve it, fight to keep the power of it because you know that there is. Otherwise, when Chris Rock jokes, who wants to trade places with me and I'm rich, we all know. So if we can't acknowledge that that's here, then how do we fix it? And if no one's really willing, and that's broad, I'm generalizing. If many people are not willing with all of the, if anything, they're pushing back on anti-racism and what, I don't know how we fix it.
So let me give you a counter argument that I think is fairly strong. After the massacre at the Emanuel AME Church in Charleston, you had people from across the state, white and black, who rallied to see the removal of the Confederate flag from the state legislature in the state of California and the state of South Carolina.
I'm sorry, I can't let you keep going because it was a petition that I wrote.
That's what I was getting to. A petition that you, I think, had as much to do with anybody, or maybe were the person who got rolling. Correct? But that seems.
It was me writing that petition on the heels of that, and then Bree Newsom going up grabbing that flag. So it was a domino effect. I called Nikki Haley that morning, Thursday morning. I called her office before I pinned the petition because I was like, I got a radio show, maybe you too. How can Clemente Pinckney's body and those 9 beautiful 8 others go past that state house with that Confederate flag? And I remember Nikki Haley was being challenged about that. And BMW was there. I remember like it was yesterday because I was involved in it, right? Oh, BMW, this is heritage. This is not hate, it's heritage. And this flag is going to stay. Nikki Haley was saying that after those people were murdered.
Right.
Those signatures on that, and it was 577,000 within 3 days signed that petition that I wrote, right? Which was amazing. And then we went to South Carolina and delivered those petitions. Every single one. I was at the State House.
Right. So do you see the point that I'm making? I take you as basically making the point. So fast forward to George Floyd. Yes, we saw what happened to George Floyd. We saw Derek Chauvin. We saw what he did. But shortly after that, you had people, white and black and every color, taking to the streets in protest and demonstration, seeking to advocate for a change in the system that, whatever, folks listening may think of some of the politics that spilled out from it, nevertheless seemed to represent the fact that people actually did care about seeing justice take place and be extended equally across lines of color, right? So why isn't it the case, that your success, Karen, and the response that people had to your call to change to change that status quo in the state of South Carolina, and why is it that the response to the death of George Floyd that spilled out in popular movements, multicultural movements across the nation don't indicate the fact that fundamentally Derek Chauvin and the person who murdered those innocent people in Charleston do not represent the core character of the American people? Why is that not an interpretation that we can take from the aftermath of those events?
Because on the very day that Chauvin was found guilty, another Black person was killed in Minnesota, not too far from where George Floyd was killed. His monument, his memorial was taken down, and because it's not sustainable, and because we are, in my opinion, with access to all of the internet that I didn't have growing up. I had to have encyclopedias. My father bought encyclopedias for the house, for me to do my homework and things because, we didn't have the internet. with all this access to information, we're more ignorant than we've ever been. And because right now in the infrastructure bill, some congressperson, Senator Cotton, let me just say his name, put in there that we have to put in an anti-CRT amendment to this in order for this money that is desperately needed to go through, because you're so wedded to a narrative that's not true. You're so wedded to this trope, right? That you want to make sure for generations to come, we don't talk about it. That's why I'm not optimistic.
Yeah. Well, I think that first of all, it's easy to feel that way because these things are happening. And I'd like to circle back on the CRT point in just a second. But, if I guess that part of where I'm coming from, Karen, is just sort of thinking about it in terms of, okay, you've got a history that begins with slavery and genocide in the United States of America, in contrast, of course, to these high-minded moral and philosophical principles that are, articulated in the Declaration of Independence. And so those words are inspiring, but they set the stage for hypocrisy against the backdrop of reality. But then you go forward over time. Of course, slavery is ultimately abolished, and many folks who, you could classify as white, I won't call them white folks, let's say folks who, some folks would classify as white, I guess, ultimately died in the process of seeing take place. There was an abolitionist movement, of course, that preceded that. Folks like William Lloyd Garrison, Frederick Douglass, across the color lines, working together for human freedom and emancipation. Yes, you had a century of Jim Crow oppression, Ku Klux Klan terrorism, and all of these other things. But ultimately, we do culminate in a civil rights movement that does produce material and political gains, not just for African Americans, but I would argue for all society and certainly other people of color. Society does become more integrated. I frequently tell people that, and again, this is just me talking about John Wood Jr.'s, sort of life experience, and I don't pretend, as I said earlier, that it is representative of everybody else's. But like yourself, I think, I grew up with, so much to be thankful for. I mean, I consider myself to be an immensely sort of privileged person. I tell people I grew up in King's Promised Land. Now, my mother and my father had their issues, but I grew up seeing white people loving black people and people of all colors loving each other. That was just sort of the nest that, my family, I got cousins who are Brazilian, Belizean, Mexican, so on and so forth, Jewish. I grew up in that kind of environment. And, if I trace it back, I don't even think that I'm not even sure I would exist were it not for the cultural shifts that took place in the aftermath of the nonviolent movement and the civil rights movement. I mean, I can tell you that on my father's side, I'm descended from Southerners who are white, I guess you could say. I'm trying to keep up with your rhetorical discipline here, Karen, but I'm descended from, white folks from Tennessee who did not smile necessarily on interracial marriage, but who in the course of, by the time I was old enough to be able to have a conversation with them, they already loved me and my brother more than they loved anything else in the world, just pointing to the fact that people can change and progress can be made, right? And so, that's, I guess, where I'm coming from with this.
People make exceptions. The truth of the matter is, John Wood Jr. is left to just be people. Mm-hmm. Figure out how to love one another. We figure out how to work together. People always have done that. I mean, you think about, you said that, civil rights, and then there was Black Power. Those movements happened at the same time. And then it was Nation of Islam, which brought us Malcolm and Louis Farrakhan and others. Before that, it was Garvey and W.B. Du Bois and Booker T had their thing going. Henry Harrison. There were always these things where, Jack Johnson got in trouble because he was, the Mann Act, We always have worked together. And if we're even talking about the Black Power movement and the Black Panthers, many would argue that what killed, Judas and the Black Messiah, what killed the Black Messiah, Fred Hampton, was that he was bridging white folk and Black folk who around the notion of, poverty and eradicating it in education, having these food programs. Everyone was eating and learning together.
Right.
What I'm saying is that there is a system that works in direct opposition. Individuals are not the problem at all. Individuals are always going to figure it out because we are DNA wise people. We're human beings. We're going to always figure out how to work together because we need each other. But there's a system in place that the polarization won't go away because even CRT, which is a whole ass legal, is a law school thing, has now entered into our lexicon as anti-whiteness and as making white kids feel bad about their themselves when 90% of y'all can't even define what it means to be white. You can't, right? So what are we fighting about? Really? History or a story that makes you feel good about being American? So what about me? And what about 5 generations, 6 generations ago with my ancestors being here? Like we shouldn't tell the truth. 2 things can be true. We have the greatest nation in the world with this complicated hypocrisy as its founding roots. And if we can't talk about it, how do we move forward? We're going to keep being back here, John Wood Jr. Every 40 years, we're going to be right back here. There's going to be another George Floyd. There's going to be another Emmett Till. There's going to be another Rosa Parks. There's going to be another situation. It's Groundhog Day. And with all of that progress, and don't talk about the Black president we had. Please don't bring up Obama.
I hadn't yet, but
don't do it. Don't do it. Irrelevant for this conversation because it hasn't fixed the root of the problem.
Right. Well, I mean, I agree with you that did not fix the root of the problem. There are other things I could say about Obama, but look, I mean, first of all, I'm glad that you said what you said and exactly the way you said it when you said that 2 things can be true at once. We could live in the greatest country in the world, and yet we've got this complicated, morally sort of cumbersome, history that's connected to the present that we need to be able to talk about in the full dimensions of its truth. I added a little bit of my own language, but that fully resonates with me. Now, the CRT conversation is an interesting one for me, particularly in the context of your perspectives on things, Karen, because I actually feel like you might, and that maybe you haven't been sort of looking at these particular cases or dealing with this particular side of the opposition narrative to CRT, but I would think that you might sympathize a little bit with some folks' concerns. So, okay, let me give you my take on the CRT conversation. I think it's a big mess, first of all. And I agree with you. Critical race theory is a framework for legal analysis. And I think that, in a political kind of way, as often happens, it's been used as this catch-all term to more or less describe a whole bunch of things that we don't like, that don't properly fall under its umbrella. Although you will have folks say, and they might very well be right about this, that you do have some folks who are operating as educators in different schools in different places, who are working with consultants, who are advertising their services and helping to shape, I guess, teaching methods in certain areas as being critical theory in their derivation or critical theory in their inspiration or whatnot. And so, the war over the origin of terms is, I can't even go all the way into it. But my feeling is that you got folks who are saying we need to tell the truth about history and we need to learn the things that the educational system has not allowed us to know and understand that are relevant to understanding where this country is coming from and where we're at now. And to me, that is a justifiable position to hold. On the other hand, you've got some folks who are saying that their objection, and when I say some folks, I'm not just talking about like YouTubers and people on Twitter, I'm talking about parents. And I know this because, I've talked to a number of these parents who are objecting to, they're calling it critical race theory, but, whatever you label it as, they're objecting to educational methods that they feel are forcing them and their children, more specifically, to emphasize race as significant to their individual understanding of who they are and who they are in relation to their classmates in ways that parents are uncomfortable with. And so I'll just give you like a couple quick examples. I mean, I know of a mother who's suing a school in Las Vegas because she has a biracial son who's fairer skinned, and his teacher decided to have a conversation about colorism that called upon each student to racially self-identify and made the point that fair-skinned people have more privilege than other individuals. And she feels that this puts her son in a vulnerable social situation and is undermining her authority to educate her child. I saw a video clip that went viral, and for some folks, kind of a negative way, where you had a person who I thought was probably very well-meaning, a coach who basically had kids of all different races in his class, lined them all up so that they're standing right next to each other. And then he started reading off statements like, take a step forward if you have a family member who's in the criminal justice. No, take a step backwards if you have a family member who's been to prison. Take a step forward if you come from a two-parent home. Take a step backwards if you come from an immigrant family. Take a step forward if you're white. And the purpose was by showing where people wind up standing, how it is that their race and factors connected to race determine their privilege in society. And so that's how he chose to teach his class. You got some folks who are just upset about stuff like that and who feel like it's centering race in a way that's obliterating our ability to look at each other as individuals, and that this is driving racial polarization in society. So that's a part of this that I think it's lumped together with the controversy, but it's worth looking at. Yeah.
What class does that fall under?
Like, what class does that? Yeah, right.
Math, science, is it history? What? I mean, again, you're taking individual situations, which to me are egregious, and applying them to the notion of what I understand is we should learn history. I had to learn everything about the Revolutionary War, which is good. Everything about George Washington. He didn't cut down a cherry tree. He was honest Abe all throughout, had to memorize, regurgitate. Spanish-American War. I remember having to do a whole project with the Civil War where I used little toy soldiers and I built this whole thing. I never once learned. I had one chapter on slavery with all of the bodies in the holds of a ship in a classroom where I was only one of maybe 3 people with my complexion. So all the kids are looking and they're feeling bad for me. And I'm like, all right. And that was all we learned. Never learned about Robert Church Sr., never learned about Annie Malone, never learned about Mary Ellen Pleasant, never learned about Mary Lena Walker, never learned about George Washington Carver, never learned about W.B. Du Bois, never learned about Frederick Douglass, but, didn't learn about any of those. Learned about slavery, but nothing else, right?
Right. Yeah.
Now, thank God, I had a father that, again, we had encyclopedias, but he also brought a lot of books and my mom into the house. And so I read about a lot of things. And some of these books, like this Black book that Toni Morrison did, that was from my father's library, rest his soul. And I think about all the things I didn't learn. And thank God for Ebony and Jet, thank God for them, but that shouldn't, the school system is not the place to and I think about, as you're talking about this, Jane Elliott and what she did with the brown eye, blue eye.
Yeah.
Exercise, not
exactly. That's what
again, without talking about race, she fostered humanity and empathy among her class, separating them by eye color. Brilliant. We don't have those kind of teachers now. They need to stand down, because unless you're as brilliant as Jane Elliott to evoke empathy, you're only going to mess it up. I think we should stick to the facts. And we should tell the whole history and pepper in all the other things, not to make anyone feel bad. I shouldn't have to feel bad either, sitting in class learning about slavery that way, right? No one should feel bad going to school, but we should leave school learning. Our school system is trash right now. And from city to city, state to state, municipality to municipality, you don't know what you're going to get. And this pandemic, to me, underscored a lot of the failures in the school system. And God bless every teacher, because you have one of the worst jobs in the world in terms of thankfulness and pay. You should be getting paid as much as doctors and lawyers, in my opinion, more than lawyers, definitely more than lawyers. But it's one of the worst jobs from this standpoint, that you are going to always get it wrong, and things keep changing and it's so hard to catch up. But I think if we all agree on a certain set of facts, which is why I'm not optimistic, because we can't even do that. That's ridiculous what you just talked about. And I would have a problem with that too. You don't separate my child and make my child feel bad for anything, but telling the facts about what happened should not be, akin to making you feel bad, unless you identify with the power structure. Unless you identify with this made up construct, and then ask yourself why. What is it to me, this thing called whiteness? Because we could talk about American history without even bringing in white and black. We could talk about it from a systemic standpoint and what Cotton did and why you had to kidnap these people from, Africa to do what, and that they built Washington, D.C. and that this is what, like without bringing in this whole, this dysfunction, which is what I think we're just a big dysfunctional nation. It's like we need counseling.
Yeah. Well, that's what Braver Angels does, of course. We offer some manner of counseling for folks across the divide. But no, when I was, when I was a kid coming up in the public school system, I did not learn about Black Wall Street. I didn't learn about Henrietta Lacks. I didn't learn about redlining until I was an adult. And it's funny because I was, living in Los Angeles, had family in Inglewood. And if I had known about redlining, I would have understood why it was that, once you get west of Inglewood, you don't have too many people of color living in a certain area, because you go back just a few decades and, you would find yourself by dint of policy excommunicated from the housing market as it existed west of Crenshaw Boulevard, and certainly, west of Prairie going towards the coast. And if you went east across the Alameda corridor, where there are very few African Americans today, it used to be a white neighborhood, now predominantly Latino, but you would get beat by the police. And they didn't have Jim Crow segregation. They didn't have the Ku Klux Klan exactly, but they had the LAPD, and that's how the LAPD operated in those times. And some people make the case that even today, although I would argue that there's been tremendous improvement. But all that aside, I actually get a little bit optimistic listening to you, Karen, despite the fact that you don't seem to feel that way, because I hear in what you're saying what for me looks like the actual consensus point, the actual common ground that I would hope could emerge out of the CRT conversation. Because I think that if you just asked folks in general, should we learn the truth, the whole truth about American history? I think that people would tend to say, yes, it's important for us to understand about redlining. It's important for us to know about Frederick Douglass. It's important for us to know about the systemic inequities and inequalities that are baked into our history, and to have a conversation about how these things may interact with the present. At the same time, we need to do that in a way that allows us and that allows our children to be able to share a space together and interact with each other, and to recognize one another as fellow human beings who are a part of God's family, if you want to put it religiously for a second, regardless of the color of their skin, and that we're entitled to equal dignity and the culture of I would hope, love and goodwill that is not predetermined by whatever your label might happen to be, and whatever your ethnicity, whatever your relationship is to the idea of, white or black or what have you, that there's humanity that transcends that, and a human frame in which we ought to come together and be able to teach and relate to each other. So to me, that's got to be the common ground ultimately, or that's what I'm pushing for. And the only difference that I can tell between you and I is that I'm optimistic about it, because I think it's possible for folks to learn that. And I think you might get there tomorrow.
Well, no, I'm a little older than you are, and I've done probably a lot more than you have, and I've seen a lot. So I started out optimistic, but watching that very thing that we can't even have that conversation. So you would have to ask yourself, in order to arrive at some optimism, why is this being framed this way? Because that seems to be a very easy fix. So why is it being framed in a way that is being framed politically? Why when we talk about police, and there's a lot of triggers right now. There's almost like a script, which is why I know that makes me pessimistic. People are reading from something that they don't even understand, and they're repeating these letters and they're repeating these phrases, and it's in rinse and repeat, and it's going to be in political ads. Why are you doing this when you know you're misinforming people? So then that tells me that there's a desire to keep it the way it is and to keep people fighting. So if there's money being thrown to keep people at each other's throats, first of all, why? And who's funding it, right? Because there's a lot of money in this. And how's the media complicit? Well, they are. So yeah, it's big is the point, John. I mean, it's really, really big, which makes me really pessimistic, because if there's that much money invested in keeping things the way they are and turning that heat up, turning that noise up, when it's so simple, because even as you're talking, I'm like, Black is not a monolith. So, and Black only exists because it's white. And I can never be white, so you already have a construct that I can never be a part of. So how does this work? And, even talking about the New Deal, which created this great middle class, guess who was left out until the 70s? How do you create one of the greatest programs in our history and leave out people who work in farms and fields and work domestically in people's homes? Who are you targeting? And why would you do that? And why don't we have that conversation? So, as you look at, you're incarcerated. Well, yeah, slavery was abolished. Well, why did you put a but clause in the 13th Amendment? Why would you put an exception clause unless you already designed the system to fill it? You don't create an exception to an amendment unless you plan on making sure that you're going to re-enslave people. So I feel, the more I know, and I think that's part of my pessimism. I'm reading a lot of books right now, and reading Randall Robinson. I'm going to make a recommendation, The Debt by Randall Robinson, which is messing me up. Before that, it was Tom Burrell's book, Brainwash. That messed me up. And then before that, it was Carter G. Woodson, The Miseducation of the Negro. And at each point, the more I'm reading, the more I'm like, this is by design. And once you come to that conclusion, it's hard to shake, like, how do you fight something that is a behemoth? Well, most people are set in their ignorance. They're comfortable in their ignorance.
Sure. Well, I don't know how, religious you're comfortable getting in a conversation like this, but I do think that there is sort of, such a thing as human nature, and the Bible would put it in terms of the spirit and the flesh and so forth. And I think that, you start looking at the world, right? You start looking at human institutions and whatnot. Yeah. I mean, there's this deep proclivity towards the pursuit of power, self-centered sort of greed and selfish ambition and so forth, but then again, there are other forces that work in human nature too. And I do think that these forces, love, goodwill, kindness, and charity, a willingness to understand the perspectives of other people, to sacrifice for other people, even when it's against your own material short-term interests, these are things that move history as well, I would argue. And I think that, again, the difference between you and me, from what I can see, is that, I think you're rightfully identifying the consistency of the corruption throughout the course of American history. And, we're a society of human beings. I'm not minimizing it at all. In fact, I'm centering it. We have to be honest about the depth of that corruption, of this race-based fabrication and manipulation of our systems in order to use race as a means of retaining power and extending control and oppression over people. All of this is relevant, and it's even relevant in a modern context, at least as a backdrop for conversation. But I see there as being a trend line of progress. It's not a straight line up. It's not a straight line up. It goes up and it goes down. It zigs and zags, but it trends up, I think. And so I'm a believer in the idea that, ultimately, I mean, I'm gonna give a quote that you've heard 15 million times before, but it just keeps working for me. The moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. I think that we do find ourselves taking a step back, every third step, but we're also taking 2 steps forward. And sometimes it's more like 2 steps back and 1 step forward and 3 steps back, but maybe we'll get lucky and it's 4 or 5 steps forward, whatever the combination. I think that when you move forward in hope and in faith, things do tend to move in the right way. And I feel like my own existence is kind of a byproduct of that. And so part of my gratitude for the struggles that people have endured in the past is maintaining a hope for the future. And you yourself are a part of that, because I think that you've been a force for getting people to open their minds, to open their eyes, and to consider the ways in which things can change so as to more fully reflect the dignity of the human family. And, whatever the differences in our particular analyses, I'm very glad to see you on the field, pushing forward, even if you don't feel all that hopeful about it sometimes.
Well, every day I pray. I pray that the Holy Spirit takes precedence when I open my mouth on a microphone, because I do believe that it only takes a few. We don't need everybody. Mm-hmm. And as I talk about my pessimism in what is holding America together right now. I don't have any faith in it. I don't think it can't hold, because spiritually it is, again, rooted in something use biblical references again. It's built on a house of sand. It's built in something that is not solid, right? Which is a myth. It's got to go. Now, one could argue, out of manure comes great, wonderful things flourish. So I feel like whatever this is has to go. It has to fall, has to crumble, so that something really good can come. And the really good is going to require all of us to participate in building the world we want to live in. So for me, I want peace. I want to live in a world where I can go into a store and people aren't making assumptions about me, where I can split infinitives and people aren't making certain assumptions about me. I can, be loud and gregarious, and I'm not called an angry Black woman because I talk with my hands and I talk loud, where I can just be myself, and where children can just be children, no matter what they look like, because there's no race outside. And this is so cliche. The only race we are is human. And we all have different, two Black people can have completely different experiences in this country, because we're human. We have fingerprints that are different for a reason, but we don't celebrate those differences. And we don't understand that all of those differences make this thing work. It's the only way it can work. I've said this before. I feel like humanity is like this giant puzzle that has exploded into several billion pieces. Your piece is shaped a certain way, but it fits in only in a certain place. And you have to figure out how to fit in, but we can't all be the same shape, or the puzzle doesn't work. We don't all come together. And too many of us are trying to be somebody else's shape, somebody else's, beat, and run into somebody else's beat, instead of being happy in who we are. And I just want to end by saying, Avant-Garde is my hero right now. The young lady that won the spelling bee, the Scripps Howard spelling bee. She plays basketball in her spare time. She memorizes spellings, names, and places and things. And the joy that she had, this young lady, to me, is the model for how we should go about life and do everything. And so now I'm optimistic about the future because of young people. I'm not optimistic about this settler colony enterprise called America. I don't see how it's sustaining, but we'll see.
Nevertheless, you are being your piece of the puzzle beautifully, Karen Hunter, and you are free to be loud and gregarious on the John Wood Jr. show absolutely anytime. And so it is really a pleasure and a joy to get the chance to talk to you at some length there. And I hope that we can do it again. Do you want to leave our folks with anything in terms of how we can follow your work? You want us to follow you on social media? Folks got to tune into the Karen Hunter show. What do you want to leave us with?
Yeah, you could do that on Sirius XM. I like that space a lot. Sirius XM channel 126, Urban View, where talk empowers and becomes action. Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter, I guess, at Karen Hunter. I'm again, not that I don't want followers, but I just feel like we haven't had enough. We need more leaders. That's what I need y'all to do. Y'all go out and lead, do something.
There you go. There you go. Yeah, you ain't just got to follow. We need folks to lead. Okay. Well, Karen Hunter, it's been my pleasure, my joy, and so glad to have been able to talk to you here today. And so we'll throw up some links for you in the description, even though Karen doesn't seem to want to self-promote herself too much. We'll take care of that for her. In the meantime, for folks who are appreciative of the work of Braver Angels, the John Wood Jr. Show is a product of the Braver Angels Media Network. We are building the space for folks left, right, Black, and white to be able to meet each other on the plane of their common human dignity so that we can restore the fabric of democracy. Folks, join us. You can find us at braverangels.org. You can become a member. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel, to this podcast. We are building a house united. Until next time. Okay, Karen. That was great. That was a lot of fun. I really appreciate you.
All right, y'all. Don't be chopping it up and trying to use this in the for some political ad.
No.
Like, what the hell? Do it at your own peril.
There you go. Well, getting in good trouble now and again.
Bye, producers. Appreciate y'all.
All right, Karen. Talk to you soon, I hope.
John. All right, bye-bye.
Take care. That was good.